Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Modern Maze. Thank you for being here. Hope you're having a beautiful day so far. Adrian and me are really excited to bring you the next part of our conversation. So I will hand it over to Adrian in a moment, but I hope that you've maybe had some time to reflect on what we spoke about in the last episode. If not, that's okay as well. We'll quickly recap now and maybe at the end as well as to what some actionable steps are for you. With all of that being said, Adrian, thank you again for your time today, and thank you for being a guest on another episode here. And maybe let's start off with a little recap on what we discussed last time.
Yeah, for sure. Glad to be back. And so the last episode, remember, if you're listening to this, remember we've kind of started this metaphor of the hourglass, where at the top we kind of want to weave together and mix together three things: our individual skills and talents and roles, so something that's coming from the inside out, something that you want to offer to the world, then kind of connecting that with the larger systemic issues and things you are really caring about, and understanding the problems in the world on a deeper level and finding a bit more of your focus there. And then the third piece is really between the very big picture and what comes from your inside. And that's really about finding your people, your communities, your networks, because this systemic change work is something that we can only do together. So this segment was really about, how can you find communities that you're resonating with, and how can you start collaborating and connecting and being in touch. So all of this kind of starts to funnel down into, we can call our niche, a unique contribution to a kind of regenerative, equitable, and thriving world. And we also said that this is not just a stale kind of job position or, like a boxed-in career. It's something that's really unique to you, that's innovative because it weaves together all of your life experiences. It's something that only you can bring to the world. And we kind of invited you into this process of taking action and reflecting on these different pieces to really find where can you make an impact. So I think that's kind of like the recap of the last episode.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So with all of that being said, maybe let's jump into what's next. So I think the last thing that we talked about was the niche. And so maybe if we want to just pick up from there and discuss what's the next step in this process.
Yeah, exactly. So as I mentioned, now it was kind of funneling down into that essential niche, like where you feel alive, where you feel like you're contributing, where you feel, you wake up with a sense of purpose, with a sense of excitement. And now we start to flip things, and we're going into this bottom half of the hourglass, which is then really about, okay, now you have a better sense of what's your unique contribution, but now you want to really bring that into the world. You want to implement it, and you want to start, creating projects, collaborating with others to make a larger, contribution and impact. And I think also you want to find a way to sustain yourself and maybe your family, paying the bills, generating an income out of this. So I think in this episode, again, just, big picture, we're going to look into a couple of elements. One is, how to approach projects in a more collaborative way that, takes all these kind of pieces at the top half of the hourglass into consideration. So this is really about strategy. It's about getting things done in a collaborative way while still honoring your unique contributions. So I think that's like the first element we can look at. Then how does that kind of connect to the messages that you put out into the world? Maybe you're creating content on social media or something like that, but really refining, like, how do you communicate with others in a way that attracts more opportunities, that creates some visibility, that enables you to connect with others and learn together. And then the third element is really about income models. So there's a couple of different pathways that I've seen people in this space kind of take in order to do this work that's meaningful, that's needed in the world, but at the same time not financially, crash and burn out. And we're going to talk about a bit more of that, transition and some key kind of tips and strategies and different ways to generate an income for yourself. So I think those are the three pieces, project and action, and then messaging and content. And the third one is really making an income while you also make an impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Perfect. Sounds like a good pathway here. So maybe let's start off with I guess you've called it strategic positioning and defining your contribution. And I can really see just before you begin how the first three bits really lend itself to defining that niche and then your strategic positioning. Just a quick reflection here. When I'm reaching out to people, sometimes I don't know exactly what to say or how to position myself. It's kind of like, I am a podcaster, like I am connected to nature. This is sort of what I want to work in. So for me, myself, it's been very unclear as to exactly what is my strategic position here and how do I really succinctly define what I can contribute. So I think that this is maybe just a good little recap of where I'm at, but please, Adrian, take it from here.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing where you're at. And I think we can continue kind of like going with your example, and like looking into your challenges because they relate to, I think, what a lot of people are feeling. So I think one thing, like one shift that happens, at the center of the hourglass, you kind of looked inside, your unique contribution, and now you want to start flipping the script and you want to say like, okay, ultimately, when I communicate with people, it's not so much about me. I think this is like some work on storytelling, and particularly the story brand framework, I think does that really well, where you're like, you don't want to be the hero in the story. So if you're communicating on wherever that is, in social media or, sending messages, sending emails to others, you want to have a better understanding of what are people working on, what are their problems, and not necessarily, just the individuals, but also what are the problems they're working on. Again, I think this relates to the more kind of systemic issues, right? And your understanding of those. So you want to start flipping the script and you want to have a messaging that doesn't really center yourself and what you're doing, but it centers the problem of the people like you're working with or these larger systemic issues. And then it positions your work as one approach, and I think particularly in collaborative context, if you approach a community, you can say things like, hey, I've seen your website. I think what you're doing is amazing. I can see that you're working on these three, problem areas, and I've been reflecting a lot on this, and I feel like this is how I could contribute, right? So this is like kind of the conversation. Similarly, also, if you apply for a job or something like that, you find an organization, they're doing some really impactful work, and you're like, oh, they have an open position, I want to apply for that. Like, what's interesting for them is not necessarily all the great things that you can do by yourself, but how does your unique skill set support what they are trying to do collectively, right? So you want to be able to mirror your unique contribution in terms of what's needed in the collective and what kind of challenges you can support a community, an organization, employer to overcome. So I think that's a big shift in messaging. So that's really why it's now kind of flipping the script, and we're not focusing so much anymore on what is it that you want. Of course, it's what is it that you want, but it's also about, how can you find that middle ground and kind of create a story and a narrative where your unique contribution is really creating a strategic impact and benefit for the people that you're working with.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, flipping that story to where it's not just about what you can do in isolation without context to what specifically they're working on and what opportunities they have and how you fit into that piece of the puzzle. So yeah, really good points. I can really see that being useful for myself and for people as well, and how to position themselves. I have a question with this point in particular. I guess, have you had experience? Well, I know you have with yourself because you've created your own niche, but maybe for people that want to contact organizations that don't have roles advertised, I guess, like there's no specific job advertised, but maybe they're interested in the cause or the organization itself. Would the approach be any different to if there is a specific job or opportunity that they're applying for?
Well, I think it's a different approach, but still the same principle in a way. Like first you're doing some research into what are they. Maybe they also have some online events or some local events where you can just show up. I think one important thing is to just show up and see where people are at, where these organizations are at, and if you can show up to an event, you understand much more about their work and about their content. If that's not available to you and you're just kind of sending an email in the hope of kind of, things are coming to reply, I think one thing that's important is to, always kind of celebrate and kind of point out, oh, this is something that really inspired me in your material, your approach, and that really resonates with me because, and just being genuine about that, right? And then kind of starting I could imagine that you're facing some challenges in this work, and I was curious about if we could meet up. I'd love to learn more about your work. I think there's different kinds of approaches. If you just want to connect with somebody, I think that the approach of saying, hey, I think your work is great, I'd love to learn more, kind of often works. If you want to learn more about a specific opportunity, a job opportunity, like that approach is different. But ultimately, it's always about decentering also ourselves and seeing where are people at in their reality, where are organizations at in their reality, and then finding kind of entry points and having conversations that are mutually beneficial. So I'd love to kind of to make this a bit less abstract. So having talked about these ideas of, flipping the script and not so much talking about you, but more about, what are they working on? How would that change your approach to, to the podcast, to the messages that you're sending to the organization you want to reach out in Melbourne? Like, what are you reflecting on?
So just to make sure, the question is, how does my approach change when I'm reaching out to these organizations related to the modern
so
maze?
It's kind of just to explore. So you've had a way of reaching out before, and now that we're kind of talking about the kind of refining your messaging and how you approach things, and how would you shift your approach? Like, are there any insights that kind of stand out and kind of ideas for how to take this into practice?
No, great question. Let me just reflect on this 1 second. Yeah, it's funny. Actually, everything that you said kind of aligns with what I've been doing. So normally it's an introduction, what I'm doing, what I'm passionate about. And then I usually try and include a bit where I talk about that it would be good to spread the message of the organization, or that I would be interested. That's usually the offering that I bring people, is that I would love to spread your message, have a conversation. So it usually begins with what I'm doing, what do I resonate with, what am I trying to build, and then offering them something, which is, to have a conversation, to come on the platform. So yeah, that actually aligns pretty well with what you were saying before.
Yeah, great. No, I think that's good, and that's a good shift of approach. And I think it starts to kind of, just going with the flow here, it starts to kind of tie into also making an income, right? So and let's connect the kind of messaging piece with creating an income and being able to pay the bills. I think that's like a big pain point in this field of people have a lot of passion, people, want to bring a change in the world, but the dominant systems are not really providing a whole lot of jobs. Like you've been coming from a corporate job and like now you're transitioning, but it's not that, most of the jobs that are out there are like, how do we regenerate the planet? How do we address climate change? Actually, the contrary, right? Because now more and more funding is being cut and so on and so forth. So I think the way messaging kind of ties into here is, I think there's a couple of different pathways to make an income. And what I recommend is like to try out different ones that suit you, and to also look at ways of combining different income streams and really looking at this in terms of a transition. So if you're in a job right now and you have some payment, maybe there is a way for you to reduce hours, in a way that still, you can still cover some things, and then you have like a little bit more time on your hands to build up something for yourself. If that's not available to you, then I think it's just doing it in even more compressed times. Maybe you have a couple of hours per week and you can start building something that goes into the direction of what you want. So it's the spectrum of, being in a job that doesn't really fulfill you, or not having a job, towards being in a space where you feel like you can make an impact and a contribution. And I think, again, tying into the last episode, a big part of that is like, how do you build your stack of skills? Because no matter what you do, like if you want to start an enterprise by yourself, if you want to become employed with a social impact organizations, what matters is like, what do you bring to the table? Like, how can you, support these organizations or your clients or whatever to overcome specific problems that are really creating pain for themselves. Okay. So that's where, again, this kind of flip in messaging and really understanding a bit more, like what are the problems, the challenges that people that you're working with are facing, and then being able to position your skills in a way that, makes clear that you can support a specific transformation, or you can support a specific strategy of an organization in a really good way, becomes really important. So I think in terms of pathways for generating an income, a couple of things that I'm seeing is like there are like intrapreneurs, so those are people who are maybe more in a corporate job, but then they are running initiatives that have a more kind of transformative potential, like diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, like, bringing more well-being, more participation into these spaces. A friend of mine, he's part of a large university, which is like a very bureaucratic organization, but he's working on, creating change so that the teachers bring things in a much more participatory and student-centered way, and as opposed to, like the normal thing of like the teacher standing in front of the audience and just, broadcast their message, right? So he's really part of this kind of larger institution and working within that system to create a change and move that large kind of tanker in a direction that's more life affirming. And you can do the same in like a more of a kind of corporation or something like that. So that's maybe more the entrepreneurial part. Then I think there's also something that's a bit more entrepreneurial. Has like a lot that work that's been done on social entrepreneurship. So this is not about I'm being an entrepreneur and I'm building a business just for the sake of money, which is this very kind of extractive capitalist paradigm of business, right? But we're seeing more and more businesses that connect a business model with kind of social or ecological mission, and they are kind of balancing impact and income generating activities. So I think maybe that's a bit more my case. I've been always a bit more, entrepreneurial, of, offering coaching to people working in the Feature Network, which is my main organization. We also run a lot of different consultancies for other networks to support them in their strategic processes. So that's a bit more of like an entrepreneurial path, and that often takes more time to set up, and it has some risk involved. But I think ultimately that also can create a lot more freedom and agency. So, and then like a third pathway, I think is more about joining a mission-aligned organization. So, contrasted to the entrepreneur, which is like working in an organization which is more tied to the status quo. I think you can also, join an organization, become employed by an organization that is really impact focused. So that could be an NGO or a community organization, civil society organization, a social movement. And fortunately, there are more and more movements that are becoming a bit better resourced, and there's some open positions. I think we're going to put that into the show note. Like there's a couple of databases with job opportunities that we can link here. So I think for that, what's helpful is to also go through these databases and look at some of the job descriptions, because that's going to really help you to understand like what are these organizations looking for in terms of, skill sets, what are some of the positions that are out there. And then you can, again, start to refine and build your own skill set, right? So if you see like, there's this position, I really like that, but there's these 3, 4, 5 skills that I don't really have experience with, you can start building those and bring those into your kind of stack of skills. And that makes it easier to then kind of get a foot into the door in that sense. So I think those are 3 generic kind of larger kind of possibilities for income streams, like entrepreneurial, and then joining a mission-aligned organization. I think all of that goes through oftentimes connections. Like I think opportunities come through, generally connecting with other people, like being curious, understanding challenges, understanding problems, and then again, kind of connecting this to the messaging, being able to position your work in a way that feels meaningful for whoever it is you're talking to. And I'm gonna stop in a moment, but I think there is a misconception or like a fear, and I've been carrying this like for a long time as well. Like I think some kind of mindset around, if we're working to create the systemic changes, it's kind of like this martyr narrative of like, we just have to give and give and give, and like it's not so much about receiving. And I think that is particularly true with money. It feels like, if I'm making money with this work, it's dirty, and like it should come just from my values and so on. But if you think about it, like in the long term, what's really sustainable is that you create a pathway for you to be abundant in your own lives and to be overflowing, and not, this is not about this narrative of the online millionaires, like get quick rich kind of thing. That's not what it's about. It's about just sustaining your needs and maybe those of your family, those who are around you. And that creates like a baseline where you don't have to be like so anxious and afraid and so on, to realize that. And I think it is possible to earn money in a more regenerative way. Obviously, the whole financial system is very degenerative and very extractive. So I think part of it is exploring like what models can I use in my work and in my organizations that are not extracting, that are not perpetuating the status quo, but that also make sure that I don't fall into this perpetual scarcity that won't allow me in the long term to sustain this work. And I know that there's a lot of nuances here around, systemic privilege and who has, time and energy and space to look into these things. I think there's a lot of people who are just in this hamster wheel going from paycheck to paycheck and not even having the capacity to think so much about these things, because there's so much struggle and there's so much, systemic barriers to, even survive, and so much violence as well. So I want to be mindful of that as well. And yeah.
Yeah, great points. And it's very well said on your last point as well. I think that's something that I always try and caveat, is that it is a place of privilege when we're comparing to others in the world to be in this position to think outside the 9 to 5 box or explore other pathways or to reduce work hours. So I think it's very important to, just highlight the realness of a lot of the world's financial situations, right? And it's funny. I don't know. I've heard some, I guess, throughout my life when there's, I don't know, people protesting about things or maybe movements happening in the West that, I've heard some backlash and the word privilege gets thrown around, which is true to an extent. But I also feel as a person who is privileged, which I fully admit that I've had a very blessed and privileged life, to me, the way that I see it, I feel like because I have that, it actually empowers me to go out and seek these changes or to put myself in situations where I want to contribute more to the world. So I feel like for me, understanding and recognizing that I am in a place of privilege has actually been empowering to say, okay, like I'm in a place of privilege. What do I want to do with that? How do I want to use that? So it's really good to just be conscious of these and to understand that not everybody's in the same financial situation as me. Really well said at the end there. The thing with the income is just, like to me, this is the big thing. And I did a poll that I referenced in our first episode where it was following my conversation with Regen Melbourne about how to activate participation in the community. And so after that conversation, I was curious as to, okay, within this community, what are the barriers to them, contributing, whether it be physical, financially, whatever it may be. And a time and money came up. And to me, that is such a barrier sometimes, especially in this, as you said, degenerative and extractive economic system, that having this clear positioning and then seeing that there are these different income models and value exchange is such a powerful, I guess, perspective to have. Because even for me, like I started this podcast, like, I'm not seeing any money on it or anything. I just do it out of the passion. So sometimes even I wonder, like, okay, how am I going to sustain myself and my family when I do decide to take this leap? And I think perhaps the previous steps, specifically networking and putting yourself out there, is you get to see that there are people that are doing this and are in work that aligns with them and their mission and their values, and they are able to sustain themselves. So I think that's something really powerful about building that network and going to these events. Because like I said before, for me, going to that first conference in Regen Melbourne was when I said, oh, wow, like this is doable. I can actually do this. So I think those are really important contexts to have here. And just to summarize, just for my understanding, you said there were 3 income pathways. So the first one was entrepreneur. The second one that I got was joining a mission aligned organization. What was the second one? Just to jog my memory.
That's more about social entrepreneurship and kind of building your own business or also co-founding a business.
Got it. Okay, great. Okay, so now I guess the next step now, so in making it financially viable and you've built this sustainable career for yourself with diverse income streams, what's next for somebody now at this point?
Yeah, so I feel like that piece around privilege, that you've talked about, and particularly in connection to money, is actually like a really vital point. And on the one hand side, privilege enables this, like these choices that both of us are making of like, hey, we want to contribute, like we have the space to think about it. But obviously the whole system that creates the privilege is actually like the root cause of the issues, even the ecological crisis of today. And I feel like it has some consequences for, at least, just speaking for myself, for how I show up in my work. So I think a couple of years back, I've got called out. I realized that, a lot of my work, no matter how well intentioned, was actually still, excluding a lot of people. And I wanted to then go into this inner inquiry of like looking at where are my blind spots? Like, what is it that I need to unlearn? I think there is like a piece around learning, right? Like learning new skills and learning new ways of being, but also unlearning, because these dominant systems, that we can name them, like the neoliberal capitalism, which puts profit over lives and everything. And then, the kind of evolution of colonialism, where Europe, Western Europe, and later on America kind of went into all these places in the global south and created so much havoc, created, genocides, created extraction all over the place. Like, that's kind of morphed into coloniality. Like, the official period of colonialism is over, right? But we still very much see these patterns play out at a global scale. Then in every society, there is still, a lot of systemic racism and sexism and ableism. Like, and I think it kind of ties back to, what we said in the last episode, that a lot of people are talking about this kind of story of separation, that the current dominant systems, they are drawing all of these lines of like, okay, this is better, this is less good. Like, like European knowledge stands above everything, and that's very wrong. And it also created these outcomes to a large degree, that we see, ecosystems collapsing and so much inequality. So I think that's like a bit of a macro level background, but then it also relates to our individual work as change makers, and really looking at like, how have I been socialized? I mean, I'm from Germany, and I have, different privileges. I have other things where I'm less privileged, but, in general, that's there, and kind of questioning that and inquiring into that, like, and also seeing like, how does it show up in my work? So instead of, being the savior who like knows it all and comes in and just tells everybody how it's done, like, I want to take a more kind of humble and collaborative stance, so instead of being arrogant and saying like, this is, I'll show you the way, which I think happens so much in these kind of colonial mindsets. It's about really unlearning and going through the discomfort and reckoning with, what did, in my case, Germans do, or like in Africa, in China, where there has been so much harm that's been created, and stepping into a place of accountability and really action around that, I think is very important. And it relates to money, and it relates to wealth, because a lot of the wealth generating systems in businesses have been based on this extraction, right? Of like, everything has been based on like, we're going to other places, we're going to the Amazon, we're taking the wood from there, we're going to Africa, we're taking the rare metals from there, and so on and so forth. And obviously that's created in incredible amounts of suffering, and it's created ridiculous amounts of wealth concentrated in, the hands of a couple of people and corporations. So like, within that context, right, so what does it mean to explore regenerative ways to make an income? Because ultimately, even though it would be maybe desirable to get rid of money, I don't see that happening, right? So how can we create different ways of resourcing not only ourselves, but also our collectives, our organizations? And we've talked a bit about the kind of individual pathways, like more kind of entrepreneurial, and then the kind of, joining a mission-driven organization. And I think, I mean, just in terms of my story, again, and I can't speak for everybody just because of like where I was raised and, the pieces around privilege that we've talked about. So my advice doesn't apply to everybody, but I think my journey has been a lot of experimenting, even volunteering, building skills, building this unique contribution that we've covered in the last episodes, and really seeing like where can I add value, where can I add things. And now what I'm currently kind of running and experimenting with is that 30 hours of my week I work for the Fito network, which is the organization. So that kind of covers my baseline costs. And I can dive a bit deeper into the income models of that organization itself, because I think it's also interesting to look at this at a collective level. And then one day of the week, I get to kind of concentrate on my own thing. So what I do is a lot of writing online, and connecting, the newsletter and connecting social media content to coaching sessions that I offer. And I'm also building an online course around this, because where I want to get to is that, things are also a bit more automated. And like basically what we're covering in this podcast episode, I'm going to create an online course around that. And then, whenever I share content online, people can kind of move and see this course. And if it solves their problems, it's great, because then, I can support somebody to find their unique contribution to regenerative change. And at the same time, I can also, make an income from that. So that's kind of like my kind of more entrepreneurial piece. And the other piece with the organization is still entrepreneurial, because we're working on our own kind of income models there as well. But it gives a bit more stability. So that's kind of like a bit of the situation where I'm in right now, and like how I got there. So yeah, I don't know where you want to take this next, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's very interesting to hear, I guess, the different income streams that you have, and is something that's quite inspirational for me, actually, as I stepped out of a 9-to-5 position that, I've spent my whole working life in that sort of work structure. And what I found was, once I started doing the podcast and trying to build these other things, I didn't have the mental space or even physical energy. So I was burning myself out, because I was trying to work on, what's my passion, and trying to build something from the ground up. But I was working, 9-to-5. And so part of coming back to Melbourne has been trying to understand, okay, what does a life look like where I'm doing different things and I'm able to fulfill my basic needs and get to build something. So, in my case, it's, I'd love to work like 30 hours a week in an organization that aligns with me, have a day for the modern maze, whether that be, I want to step into making YouTube videos and writing more. So creating the space for that, and then maybe even a few days for yoga teaching. So I think to hear your story and where you're at now, and how you've built a life that encapsulates all of these different things is really inspirational for me to hear, actually. And I think a few of the listeners might feel the same way as well. I guess in terms of next step, I guess when you've built this life for now, and you've found things that resonate with you, and you're contributing, and you have these multiple income streams, I guess, are you just set with that for life, or how do you future-proof this approach? How do you adapt? How do you tackle what's next? So sort of, what does the future look like when you've reached the point that you're at right now?
Yeah. I'm gonna speak to that. I just think like a last point on the income models that I wanted to make was, again, kind of tying it back to skill sets, right? Because like if you, for example, in your case, you want to build the modern maze, and I know you wanted to maybe also offer some workshops. Maybe there's also some, some online courses. What I see is like some people, for example, they have a podcast and like bring different people in, and it creates like a lot of value and like connection with you. But then there's also these other offers, like a cohort-based, program on a specific topic that you've been covering in the modern maze, or there's an online course, some kind of way to also for people, if they want to go deeper and they want to learn more from you, that there is like an opportunity to do that. And I think it creates this beautiful flow where you're offering a lot of things for free and a lot of these conversations and writings. And then at some point, if people want to dive deeper, they can reciprocate. And I think seeing that, transaction more as like a flow of nourishing and like people also, honoring, what you're giving to them, I think helps to get rid of this kind of sense of guilt of like, oh, I shouldn't earn money with this. So I think that kind of part around, content creation and like that's more your entrepreneurial piece, right? And that requires different skills and maybe things you haven't like thought so much about of like, okay, how can you connect the podcast with like an offer that also kind of generates some revenue for you? And then there's like the other set of skills is then, finding that organization where you want to work like 30 hours. So obviously that's like the job hunting skills in some way, but also what we've talked about before of, connecting, being out there, researching, going to events, being kind of tuned into these job opportunity databases, of which there are more now for the kind of sustainability and impact space. And then again, I think like starting with these kind of job descriptions and then seeing like what are organizations actually looking for and like how can I build my skills in my own kind of self-directed learning project so that I become more, I don't know, I don't really like the word like employable or like it's I think that's a whole kind of different set of skills. So I think that the main shift I want you to invite into if you're listening to this is like how do you hone your skills and learn how to address problems for people, for organizations. If you want to work one-on-one with clients, how do you talk to them so it resonates? It kind of also goes back to the pieces that we talked around messaging, so how do you stop centering yourself and your perspective and really center more like the other people that you're talking to and really understanding what are the problems that are that your prospective employer or prospective client faces. And so I think that's a big shift. And and then kind of flowing into your question, which was like what comes after that, like in some ways the answer is really I don't know, and that's always been I think for all of these processes it's always been like this heroines journey of like there are so many unknowns, there's so much complexity, there's so much disruption in the world that it's very important to just remain adaptive and flexible and kind of see what comes up. I think now what's becoming more and more important for me, not that I have these different work streams and there's more and more opportunities coming my way and people asking me for things and so on, is really a way to say no and to set boundaries, to be able to stay connected to that sense of purpose in a way that honors my well-being and my body, because I think once you identify this essential contribution for yourself, you're like on fire, you have like the passion, you wake up that you want to get it done, then you start building your project, and then all of a sudden there are so many different issues, so many different details to kind of look into. And I think it can become easy to kind of do more and more and more, and then at some point kind of burn out. So I think that's where a lot of kind of inner inquiry, maybe therapy, maybe spiritual work also goes into this, of like looking into all of these dynamics of like overworking and saviorism and trying to do it all. And maybe also what I'm noticing a lot, like I'm looking at these patterns of kind of people pleasing and like struggling to say no, struggling to say boundaries, because like if somebody approaches me and wants to meet me, and I've kind of made a rule for myself that oftentimes now I say no, even though like 3 years ago I would have said yes to any kind of networking meeting. But now I need to really protect my space of focus and like working on the ideas that really move the needle. And I think what helped me here is like the work on essentialism from Greg McCohen and like other Not Nice. There's another book called Not Nice, which is about like not always, being nice and pleasing others, but really having a clarity on your boundaries. And I think that's really essential because, yeah, we want to make sure that the fire within us, like the fire in our belly, doesn't just burn us, right? Which it happened to me. That's part of my journey. Like I've burned out just when I was 23. Like that's already like a lot of years ago. I had this moment of deep crisis. And I think kind of moving to a place where you guarantee your own well-being and you have your contribution, I think that's really important. And also what we did in the last episode, I think is essential for that, because like the moment more with more clarity, like what's your contribution, then you can say, okay, those are the things, like those are the essential things that I'm focusing on. And all of these other things, all of these other issues, like I might feel compassion, but it's just something beyond the scope of what I can offer, and that helps you. So having clarity on your niche helps you to say no in that sense, and to set boundaries and to just focus on your piece of the puzzle, trusting that on a collective level, through some mysterious process that nobody understands, like we can, kind of steer this transformation. Yeah.
Again, beautifully said. Thank you for sharing your story. Yeah, I can't help but feel inspired, honestly, by all of this. And I really resonate with, but I really liked what you said about, I liked all of it, but the boundary setting is a really powerful consideration and a conscious decision that I'm sure, yeah, you've had to make. And yeah, it's like that fire that you feel inside you when you've realized, I guess, your purpose and what you want to contribute to is something that burned me last year. So I fell into that sort of savior complex because I guess, going through this process, I didn't know exactly what my role is, what my skills are, what is the issues that resonate with me the most, where do I see myself adding value. So I hadn't done this thinking, and I kind of just jumped into, I need to save the world, and I got burnt by that. So even for me, just reflecting all of these steps that we've gone through, it definitely makes things clearer in my mind and gives me that clarity. And yeah, I mean, I faced burnout properly last year when I was, I was 29. Yeah, 29. And I thought I'd experienced burnout, but yeah, I think once you do, you know that you've experienced it. So I'm glad. I mean, 23 is early, so I'm glad, I guess, that you had that and you've moved on from that. Just a quick question. So to set expectations here for people, if you don't mind sharing, I guess, how long did it take for you to, I guess, build the situation that you're in now, where you have these multiple income streams and you're working in the spaces that resonate with you? How long has it taken you to get here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think I started to do this work like a decade ago. So, and
Hmm.
then it's been quite a lot of volunteering, quite a lot of setup. I think it can be done much faster, and it's also, like now I'm in this more comfortable situation, but I could also, get by today, like earlier in that sense. But I think, yeah, it takes a lot of effort, particularly because you don't want to go into what people who are more in the dominant system are doing, right? Which is like the quick rich streams and like the extractive business models. And like if you want to earn money like that, it's it's easier, but also, ethically not correct, at least in my worldview. And so it takes quite a lot of inquiry, quite a lot of courage, quite a lot of kind of inner journeying, and then just also some skills like some of which were mentioned. And I think you can shortcut a lot of these things by learning from the right people, and having mentors and really being inquisitive about it. So, but I think if you have like the ambition to really create this unique contribution and this unique career, then it's gonna take a while. But obviously, I feel like it's really worth it, because it's something that speaks to who I am. Like I feel like I am contributing. I'm doing my part, and I think there's also this big shift that I think the burnout has created inside of me, which what you said, like of wanting to save the world, shifting that to, I just want to belong to the world, like I'm part of the world, and I'm like one thread in this a much larger tapestry, and kind of learning to trust that as well, and to trust that if I bring my unique talents and contribution, there is going to be a synergy on a collective level, and trusting in the collective, and yeah, taking the breaks and taking the rest, and learning how to regulate your nervous system. Like that's something I've been looking a lot more last year, is like, okay, also our physiology, because these crises in the world, they also, happen through our body. And like, I don't know, maybe you can relate to that, but there's also this kind of sense of agitation and anxiety and fear just around the state of the world, right? And I think learning how to regulate our nervous system, and setting these kinds of boundaries, and at the same time focusing on the essential pieces, and always being able to identify, what are some the key priorities that I have from day to day, from week to week, and to create this life where I'm nourished, where I'm nourishing, the planet, where I'm nourishing people, and that feels very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked what you said, the transition from, what is it? I will save the world to I want to belong to the world, is a really powerful reframe. And this conversation has inspired a lot in me, and everything that you said just then, again, resonates with what I've been feeling about going back to Melbourne, and now beginning this next shift in my life, where it's, okay, how do I actually build this life to where I get to work on the things that resonate with me while also nourishing myself and my loved ones? Because I struggled with that balance previously, and it's something that I recognized, and something that I had to break away from, and something that's not sustainable. So as I look to take these next steps, it's definitely something that I should be conscious of, and that everybody should be conscious of as well. I think the role of a regulated nervous system is everything in making systemic change. How are we going to collaborate, come together, discuss, and put all our energies together to making these big changes if within ourselves, we're not regulated? So from what place are we showing up for ourselves and the planet and our loved ones? Are all powerful messages to take away. Is there, for our listeners who have been on this journey with us, is there any final call to action from yourself? Maybe some exercises they can try, or where they can reach out? Yeah. Is there anything you would like to tell the listener now about, how they can begin this process, or what's next?
Yeah. So, I think what would be helpful is maybe just a recap, because we covered a lot. So I think, in that first episode, we looked at the top half of the hourglass, and really weaving together your individual skills and talents and knowledge, and positioning those in a relationship to the systemic issues, the issues that you care about, the problems that you see in the world, and then finding other people, finding communities for you to kind of tap into and connect and start to collaborate. So those three elements really going into the central piece, the niche, which is, again, also about niche in the wider ecology, in the wider web of life. It's not just in human society, it's not just your profession, it's something that really deeply speaks to your purpose, that it speaks to your soul, and that is a realization of your essence, of who you are. And then from there, we wanted to kind of flip the script. So a lot of that has been kind of self-exploration, even though you've reflected on the problems in the world that you see. But then you start to want to kind of flip the script and decenter your own narrative, your own story in a way that starts to really connect to whoever it is you want to working with. So that could be, your clients, your organization you want to work with, people you're writing for, you're creating podcasts for, and really being able to then position your unique contribution in a way that's really relevant for other people. And that's relevant in the face of these kind of larger systemic issues. And then we kind of started covering, how can you, with that flip of decentering yourself, how can you then start to create income streams, different pathways to do that, more entrepreneurial in an organization that's a bit more in a dominant system, but you want to make change inside there. Then more entrepreneurial, building your own kind of social enterprise, your own also coaching practice, wherever that is. And then the third one, kind of joining a kind of more mission aligned organization that has enough resources to cover a salary. And then we started to reflect on nuances around privilege, coloniality, these kind of systems that keep us separated from each other, and that also have influenced how wealth is being generated and distributed. And we're kind of really going to that call to action of not building an extractive, income model for yourselves, but really ensuring that those values that you have are represented in how you earn money and how you sustain yourself and your family. And then I think the last piece now was also really about bringing in, well-being. Like once you generate more momentum, once more opportunities are coming your way, that you keep, prioritizing, checking with yourself, checking with your heart, what's really my essential contribution. And that's really an ongoing, that's also happening for me, like on a daily basis, and being able to say no, to set boundaries, to regulate your nervous system, to enjoy also life, and to shift from the kind of savior narrative to a narrative of belonging, of co-creation, of being embedded in this wider web of life, which I think can also create more inner peace in that sense. So I think those are all the pieces we've covered, kind of encapsulated in this hourglass metaphor. And if you want to kind of keep learning together, I'm creating a lot of content, particularly on LinkedIn. So that's like the main piece where I share articles and daily posts around any topics related to systems change. Like that can be more on the inner level, but then also really collective strategies and how can we work together as networks and as larger alliances and movements. If you want to go even deeper, I have a newsletter. It's called the Systemic Shift newsletter, to which you can subscribe. That's coming out each Tuesday. And so again, going deeper into a lot of these different topics, and I share a lot of kind of valuable resources and opportunities and also job opportunities in there as well. And then the last piece is that by the time this podcast comes out, there's going to be an article on the newsletter and also on LinkedIn, which is diving deeper into everything that we've covered today. And that it also includes some, self-reflection questions. So if you want to go through this whole process, but now you've just listened and you didn't really get to do it, I encourage you to kind of check out that article. It's going to be in the show notes as well. And then you can kind of go through it in a more structured and guided process. And then if you want to go even deeper, what I'm currently developing is like a self-paced online course. It's just going to be, 2 hours. Going deeper into all of these topics that we covered in the podcast, and then really making that a lot more applicable, so you can create your unique contribution and explore how to then implement that into the world. So that should come out in a couple of months. So if right now it's end of February. So if you're listening to this in June or July, the course is going to be out, and you're going to be able to take it. So yeah, I think those are the calls to action. And I think more generally, I know that this journey can be challenging, both the kind of inner challenges, the fears, the confusion that we started talking about, the modern maze of like all the distractions and, the things that are holding us back. And then, of course, the massive amount of external challenges, like the things that we're facing in the world and in our communities. So I think, the last words would be just some of encouragement. And I know that these times are really times of a near-death experience for humanity. And I think, just like when an individual has a near-death experience after a car crash, it can be like a radical transformation in our consciousness and how we organize, how we show up in relationship to ourselves, to each other, and the planet. And even though it seems hopeless and daunting in many times, there is something that's shifting deep within, the consciousness of humanity. And I would just like to invite you to bring yourself to this shift, to bring yourself to this contribution, and really share your gifts and talents with the world. And it's really appreciated in all the movements that you can participate in. And I feel like it's really vital because we have a responsibility to show up in our wholeness and to contribute to the people and the planet, and to really strive for more regenerative and equitable future where there's less oppression and more co-creation in that sense. So I think those would be my last words. And thank you so much, Arya, for having me, and thank you so much for, if you're listening to this and watching to this, and thank you for giving your time to this process. And I hope you found it valuable and insightful and also practical, so that you can take things away from this that are relevant for your own lives. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for all of your time, your insights. I have found it extremely interesting and helpful and powerful and hopeful. And I really trust that listeners will feel the same. I will link everything in the show notes that Adrian has referred to. I firsthand can speak to the power of his LinkedIn post because that's actually how I found him, and it really resonated with me. So please check out the LinkedIn newsletter. If you haven't had time, those self-reflection questions as well in the latest article that will be out by the time this episode is up. Yes, thank you again, Adrian, for your powerful words and your intentional energy here today. And it's been really, really helpful for me. And thank you for taking me personally on this journey, and my listeners as well. And it's been an amazing conversation, and I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
And to everybody else, I hope you have a beautiful day. Reach out to either of us if you have questions. And take care of yourself. Stay safe. Stay happy. And I will speak to you soon. Namaste.